Welcome to another segment of the Grassy Knoll. We have with us today Eddie Kahn. That might not be a household name. Some of you do know him or know of him and what he's about. Unfortunately, it's going to remind you of some of the sagas that we've had on the show where people have seen fit to fight the machinery, and for good reason. So without saying anything more, I think I'll let Eddie explain the situation. And welcome to the show. And will you tell folks where you are and why you're there?
Sure, Keith. Glad to be with you. Yes, where I'm at right now, it's in the Marion County Jail in Marion County, Florida. And the reason I'm here is because one of my clients, Wesley Snipes, the actor, was charged with defrauding the United States government, and the conspiracy to defraud brought in myself and the tax preparer that prepared a amended tax return for him. Wesley's also charged with 6 counts of failing to file tax returns for, in other words, 1 count for each year, 6 years. And so that's why we're here, or why I'm here. Wesley's out on bond, and the tax preparer didn't have to put up a bond at all. But they said because I was living in Panama, and when they actually kidnapped me from Panama, brought me here, they said no bond for me because I'm a flight risk. Even though I offered to give them my passport, put an ankle bracelet on me, whatever else they wanted to do, report every day. No, they just had nothing to do with that at all. So that's why I'm here, Keith.
Well, you talked about Snipes being a client. What business did you run?
Okay. We had an organization called American Rights Litigators in Mount Plymouth, Florida, and we were there for from '96 to about 2003. And what I did was I had an attorney and CPA and the tax preparer. Occasionally the tax preparer would be there assisting people that were having problems with the Internal Revenue Service. As you know, the Internal Revenue Service can be pretty abusive at times, and I've experienced that personally. And I was trying to set up an organization that would help people not be so intimidated. And the attorneys and CPAs that I've had over the years working with us are strong people, and they were not intimidated by the IRS. And they would take my client's power of attorney, and then they would, if the client received a letter, then they would turn it over to the attorney or CPA for a response. And so that's what this organization was all about. And we had, at any given time, we'd have probably 2,000 or so clients.
I do remember that story. It's interesting, I guess it's a poor choice of words, but, there was a radio news story I heard, and, when I switched the channel, not thinking too much of it. And then, lo and behold, here you are, very centrally involved in that situation, and this is kind of like the offshoot of that news story I heard. And how long ago was that?
They kidnapped me back in November 1st of 2006.
Okay. Now, what was the deal with being in Panama?
I just basically had enough. I had been dealing with the IRS, challenging them to show that I could fill out a tax form, a 1040, without giving up any of my constitutional rights, and they couldn't do it. And I said, well, if I can't fill out this form without giving up my 4th and 5th Amendment rights, then I'm not going to do it. And the IRS basically said, oh, yes, you are. You're going to give up your rights. Well, we're either free or we're a slave. And I took the position that I'm free. I'm not going to do it. And that was back in 1979. And, I fought them. I went and researched. I've done thousands of hours of research over the years. And in 2004, they finally shut us down. Just got an injunction against us and took, froze all the money in the bank account, so we couldn't operate at all. And essentially just ran us out of our helping people. And so I told my wife, I said, our friends over in Panama, because we had friends that were going to Panama, and we said, they said, over here you can live freedom. You don't have to fight for it. You live it. And that just sounded so good to me. And so we've been to Panama before. I've been twice. We liked it, and so that's why we decided to go there and just retire. And that's what we were doing. We were there for 2.5 years.
All right, so you went down about when?
That was in March of 2004.
What agencies presented themselves to take you back to the United States?
The FBI. The FBI has agents that are assigned to the embassy there. And what they did was, see, I had a visa there, what's called a pensionado visa. You know, over in Panama, see, taxes are not a crime. If you get crossed with the government on taxes there, and they do have an income tax, the only thing they do is fine you, just a civil penalty. And so because of that, when this came out, I checked with my attorney that had done our visa, and she said, oh, Panama Immigration has called me. Everything is fine. Your paperwork's fine, and they can't extradite you because it's not a crime in this country. And so I knew that the FBI could not extradite me, although I did get a call. You know, well, let me explain to you, Keith. What they did was, and they do this in other instances as well, they started running what they call articles in the newspapers. See, we have in Panama City, it's about 1 million people. And they have a number of newspapers, and every day in a different newspaper would be an article just blasting me and Wesley, you know, and Doug, but particularly me because I was living there, and every day. And it looked like an article, right? But it's not an article. It is written and given to the newspapers by the FBI. And they did this for like 2 weeks, just every day. And all it's doing is making everybody in Panama think that I'm a really, really bad man. And that way they can justify when they finally come and try to take you, they can, you know, the people feel that it was justified.
All right, you said that the agents were assigned to the embassy down there. I mean, legally, did they tell you, what you were charged with and their right, in other words, to, quote, extradite you, which, of course, they didn't. You call it kidnapping, so how did this all occur?
Okay, see, they couldn't extradite me because it's not an extraditable offense, and that's why they had to go this different route. And the way it worked was I had an FBI agent call me on the telephone on my cell phone, and I found out later that they were wiretapping the cell phone. He called me and said, well, you know, you're charged with some crimes against the United States, and we're going to give you this opportunity to just come back on your own, or we'll do it the other way. Meaning I could buy my own plane ticket and go back and face the charges, or else they would do some other way. And I said, I don't really know what all this is about. I said, why don't we meet at my attorney's office, a criminal attorney, which, you know, I was going to retain, and we'll discuss it, find out what's going on. And he said, well, that's all I need to hear. And he just slammed the phone down. So I went and I retained a criminal lawyer there, and I gave her an offer of conditional acceptance to take to the FBI agent that called me. And what it basically said was, here's 8 things that I need to determine that this is a valid case. You give those documents to me, and I will buy my own plane ticket, and I will go back to the States and face the charges. And so she took that, and she went to the embassy. She met with the guy. She said, here's an acceptance. He's going to go back as soon as you give him these documents, like a verified complaint, affidavits of probable cause that support the arrest warrant, etc. You know, just basic documents that are supposed to be there. And he would not sign for it. He wouldn't do anything. You know, it's like, no, we're not going to do that, blah, blah, blah. And so she came back and told me that basically he just wasn't going to do anything. What happened was about 5 days later, as I was going to her office, because she called me, and she says, you know, I've got a reporter friend of mine that wants to hear the other side of the story, and he's willing to print it in the newspaper, and so he would like to talk to you. And I said, fine. So I took Wesley's tax return, the amended tax return that we did. I wanted to put it right in the newspaper where everybody could see it, you know, and say, hey, what's wrong with this? And so they heard that, obviously, because I didn't realize it, but they were tapping my phone. And so when I went over to her office, she's in a high-rise, and as I was going to the front doors, Panama Immigration stopped me and said, we need to talk to you about your visa. I said, well, what's wrong with the visa? I'm going to get a writ of habeas corpus hearing for you in front of a Supreme Court justice tomorrow. Okay? So they won't be taking you anywhere. Because they were still telling me that I wasn't under arrest, that I couldn't go anywhere. And I said, okay. So they made me spend the night there in a room, in a chair, with one of their officers, their immigration officers. And the next morning, about 5:30 in the morning, they're up taking me to the airport. And I'm saying, like, what's going on? And, well, this is the best thing for you, Mr. Kahn. This is the best thing for you. This is what this head guy, who I believe was paid off by the FBI to do this, because obviously if we've got a habeas corpus hearing, why is he taking me to the airport? Anyway, they took me, and there was a guy, Patrick, I believe his name was Patrick Johnson, was FBI agent, was there at the airport waiting on me. Already bought me a ticket, and said I'm under arrest, even though he had no arrest warrant. And he says, you're under arrest, and you're going back to the States. And so he did let me call my wife. I told her what was happening. She called the attorney, and the attorney rushed to the airport with the writ of habeas corpus in her hand and said, hey, he's got a hearing at 9 o'clock this morning in front of Judge so-and-so, who's a Supreme Court justice on this issue. You can't take him anywhere. And even though I'm sitting in the airport and the plane is sitting right there, they said, it's too late. And that's what they said. And you know, there was a big flap about it after I left, but you know, that's the way it happened. They took me to Miami. I'll finish that. They took me to Miami, and there 2 IRS CID agents.
You have 1 minute left to talk.
I'll have to call you back. Okay. Keith, 2 IRS CID agents met the plane, and then they arrested me again. Now, how do you arrest me twice? You know, it's pretty hard to do. But anyway, they put their cuffs on me and took me by car to Ocala, where I went in front of this magistrate. And the magistrate just simply said, okay, to jail, no bond, you know, period. And that was it. It was very, very short.
All right, Ed, you were saying they arrested you a second time, took you to Ocala, and basically, I mean, you didn't have any rights at all.
No, they just, it was so interesting, Keith, because it was so pre-planned. Everything was just planned down to the T. It was an operation, and they just ran it right to the T. Just the whole idea was to put me in jail with no bond and make sure I stayed there.
I hadn't understand. Well, let me say this. When I found out about your situation, and I wasn't all aware of that until a while ago, I was wondering why in the world you were remanded to a county facility. Now, I believe this is the second county facility that you're in, which strikes me kind of strange, thinking that if it's a federal charge, why are you in a county facility? Is there anything to that?
Well, what they do is they have a financial arrangement, the marshals do, with the county facilities to hold their prisoners until, you know, they are tried, found guilty, you know, sentenced, blah, 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 and then they move them to a federal prison.
All right, so this is not necessarily untoward, then, that this would occur. Is that situation also, since it is federal, do I take it that can also happen in all 50 states?
Oh, yes.
Okay, because
this is their procedure.
I say that because sometimes some strange things go on in Florida, if you know what I mean, and I don't know if if they're in swing with the rest of the country at times. But of course, it's something I guess that is part of the process. Now,
yes.
Can we talk about something? Were you to go before someone this week?
Yes. Actually, I had a status conference this week before Judge Hodges here in Ocala, and Wesley's attorneys were there, and Doug's attorney was there, and then myself. And it was essentially just to determine whether the trial was going to be still held on October 22nd, or else it it was determined that the trial would continue and be held on October 22nd.
You mentioned something about, I believe, perhaps bringing up a motion or filing something with regard to the Fourth and Fifth Article of the Constitution. Do I have that right?
The Fourth and Fifth Amendment to the Constitution is basically you have a right to be secure in your personal books and records. Nobody can get those without your consent. And the Fifth Amendment says that you don't have to be a witness against yourself. And the courts have ruled that once you sign that 1040 form, you are a witness against yourself. And that's what I brought up in 1979. I said, I called up an IRS agent in Dallas, Texas, where I was living, because I couldn't get an answer from tax attorneys and CPAs that I asked. How do I fill out this 1040 form without giving up my Fourth Amendment right to be secure in my personal books and records, or Fifth Amendment right not to be a witness against myself? And they couldn't answer it. So I called up and I talked to this agent, this IRS agent, and I said, how do I do that? And his answer to me was, we're not going to tell you anything. Just do it. And he slammed the phone down. And that was the turning point, really, in my life, because at that point I had an investment consulting firm. You know, everything was going good for my wife. I just recently got married. You know, it was a really nice time in my life, and that just changed it right there.
Do we want to talk about what the difference was? Now, we did, you and I both did, but for the benefit of the viewers, why presenting yourself either in a Fourth or a Fifth Amendment court is key.
Oh, you're talking about the different courts. Okay, I'm sorry. There's two different federal courts according to the Supreme Court. There's two great court cases called McKinney versus U.S., and the other one is Balzac versus People of Puerto Rico. And what they say is that there are two different types of federal courts. One of them is under Article 3 of the Constitution, and that is the one that is what they call the one with judicial power. It has the ability to hear any case in law and equity. The Article 4 courts are ones that are in all 50 states and the possessions, and they only have the authority to adjudicate the needful rules and regulations on federal property in that state, and really only in the district in the property in that state for this court. Like, for example, in Florida, there are 3 federal districts. I happen to be in the Middle District of Florida. So that means that for this court in Ocala to hear this case, it must, number one, just be, in this case, because they're an Article 4 court, that it needs to be a violation of their rules in that particular district. If it's in another district, then another court would have to hear it. So the problem is when you go and you say, okay, Judge, I need the document that identifies the geographical boundaries of the Middle District of Florida. They won't give it to you. I subpoenaed it, and the judge denied my subpoena.
Can I ask you,
I subpoenaed it.
on what grounds did he do that?
Oh, they don't give you grounds.
That's what I thought.
They don't give you grounds. They just simply said, you're not going to get it. You ask for conclusions of law and findings of fact, and they simply don't give it to you because there isn't any. There's no reason for them to deny you this, because you have a right to what's called venue jurisdiction, and that means to verify that whatever act they're saying that you violated happened on land that they have control over.
Well,
so the interesting thing here, though, and I'm glad you brought that up, is that there are, according to Ed Rivera, who's a lawyer, one of the few good ones out in California, he studied this extensively, and he said there's only 2 Article 3 courts in America. One of them is in Hawaii, and the other one is Washington, D.C. And he says all the rest of them are Article 4 courts, which can only handle the needful rules and regulations of the federal land in that district that they're in. And so that's what this court is in Ocala. And that's what all the rest of them are, too, except for those 2.
on a on a wider scale, a much wider scale, what does that mean for all of us who live in the United States?
Okay, what that means is when you go into a federal court, you have to understand what court it is. They're all Article 4 from what Ed has determined, and I tend to agree with him. They're all Article 4 courts. They're what the Supreme Court is called a mere territorial court. That's what the Supreme Court called them. And that means they don't have any judicial power. They can't legally put me in prison, for example, because only an Article 3 judge can do that. They can't incarcerate you. Only an Article 3 judge. They can't adjudicate an act of Congress, for example. Only an Article 3 court can do that. But they're pretending to be an Article 3 court, and the lawyers don't raise the issue. They're not going to raise the issue. I can tell you for sure, because they want to continue being lawyers. They're not going to raise that issue, so therefore everybody plays the game as though they were an Article 3 court, when in fact they're not.
Is this another one of the big secrets or the big jokes on us that we're not aware of?
Oh, yes, it absolutely is. When you ask for it, like for example, one of the big things that anybody should do if they go into court is they should ask, Your Honor, do I have a right to verify that you're acting within the bounds of your authority? And he's got to say yes, because there's a Supreme Court case called Federal Crop Insurance versus Merle that states that anyone entering into an arrangement with the government takes the risk of having accurately ascertained that he who purports to work, to act for the government, is acting within the bounds of his authority. So the judge, the magistrate, the prosecutors, you have a right to ask all of them for their oaths of office. Now, they have several oaths of office. Like a judge, for example, this Judge Hodges that I'm dealing with has 3. Okay? He has one oath, which he took when he was appointed judge. And I have a copy of that one. But he took another oath before that, and that was to become a civil servant, and which means that he is working for the executive branch of government. And that one, he doesn't want to give. He doesn't want to give up. Nobody wants to give it up. Okay? And that's on what they call a standard form 61. And that oath is in Title 5 of the U.S. Code, Section 3331. All civil servants take that oath. They're not judicial officers. Judicial officers, their oath is found in the First Judicial Act of 1789, and it's not the same. And all the Supreme Court justices and the district court judges, and I'm talking about the real ones, they're required to take that oath. And then he has another oath, of course, that he took as a member of the Florida Bar. So there's 3 oaths that he had to take.
All right, and getting the judges to produce that, has that been successful?
Well, like I said, Ed Rivera was successful in getting a number of them through the Freedom of Information Act. Although they write back and tell you, well, we don't have to do this, blah, blah, blah. Judges are not, they're immune from, or the judicial are immune from FOIA. But the fact is, they're not judicial. They are civil servants. They work for the executive branch of government. And the executive branch of government, it was the Freedom of Information Act and the Privacy Act was specifically set up so that you could get information from them. But they don't want to hear that. But Ed was, like I said, successful in getting a number of them. And we were successful in getting the appointment. We're just not successful in getting the civil servant appointment oath. Anyway, that's where we're at with him.
Well, we've been going through a few situations with the courts, and I refer to them as this might be reminiscent to some of the listeners of a saga that's going up in Georgia. And we've had a family on there several times. And that's a horror show as well. As far as dealing with judges and such. But what I'm wondering also, you and I were talking off mic, and you were saying whether or not we were free or we were slave.
Yes.
I've come to the conclusion, and I'm not saying that I'm rolling over on my stomach or my back or whatever, but if I'm looking at exactly the way things are, not the way they tell us they are, I've come to the conclusion that at least financially we are indeed in slavery. What's your thoughts about that, Eddie?
Well, it's for sure. If you control control the man's purse, you control the man, and they certainly are doing that. So I agree with you that economically, but and really politically though too, we're slaves. They just people just don't realize it because they think, oh, America's still the greatest place in the world to live. Well, my feeling of that is, and I've been fortunate to be able to travel through a lot of the world, is that there's a number of places that are better than America now. Unfortunately, it was when I was growing up. I'm 64. When I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, this was the best place in the world, and everybody agreed with that. You could go to any country, and
You have 1 minute left to talk.
everybody wanted to come to America. Well, not everybody wants to come to America anymore. I mean, there are still people who are disadvantaged, like the people in Mexico, you know, how they try to come over and things like that. Yeah, it's still better than their country, but there's a lot of other countries for Americans that are better. And it's a pretty sad situation.
Yes, I want to just tell everybody we're speaking with Eddie Kahn, and it's about his situation with regard to, I guess, the IRS income tax issues, and I guess a lack of rights for almost all of us, if not all of us, except I guess those who preside in the District of Criminals. And Ed, we were talking about the country, and I don't mean to go on a digression, but I think I'd have to admit also, I believe what you were saying about the 50s and 60s are right. I'm 10 years, 8 years behind you, and I mean, I guess the world looks a little different, you know, to a little kid when, like, for instance, when you're a teenager, so everything seems greater anyway. But I would agree with you, the 50s and 60s to a certain extent, America seemed more like, you know, maybe a Norman Rockwell painting, if you will. However, when I started going down the rabbit hole to find out whether or not I had truly been living in a matrix, which, of course, we all have been, I started to realize, though, too, that very quietly, and probably for the whole 20th century, I mean, there have been forces at work, I would say the robber barons and the foundations that they created, to change the United States for a future event, which would be world government. I know that's going everywhere with it. But, I mean, would you agree in a sense, though, that a lot of what is happening today, and I think coming to fruition and a little bit to the surface, has been obviously planned and worked on for some time?
Oh, without a doubt. As a matter of fact, when George Bush Sr. was in office, what did he talk about nearly all the time?
Yeah,
one world government. Yeah, a new world order. And all that George Jr. is doing is continuing on with what his dad started. And so, yeah, there's definitely a plan, and it's been going on a lot longer than that, obviously. But there's definitely a plan to. You have to bring the mighty down before you can do this, though. And America was economically so strong, so much better off than the rest of the world, and still is. I mean, you go over to England today, or you go to Austria. Well, I've been fortunate, like I say, to go to a number of different countries. They still don't have what we have. I mean, it's not even close yet. So they've got to bring us down to that level, you know, to lower where we're in there with everybody else.
Oh, yeah.
Before they can do what they want to do.
One of my thoughts, Eddie, was that we did have a better standard of living. Most of us did. I mean, poverty is everywhere, and it was almost inexplicable why it was allowed to continue to exist in the United States. That's another issue. But I think we were given a better standard of living because they wanted to draw more blood from us as well. In other words, if you're making, you know, $80,000, you can pay a lot more than somebody who's making $10,000. Percentage-wise, you know, you could argue which is more crippling, but that was my thought, was like, okay, we're going to let you guys basically have the fat of the land, but we're going to ask something for it. And I think one was obviously sticking an IV and draining us for all our lives financially. And secondly, I think we have also been used, the military of this country for the 20th century, to go fighting and do the bidding, if you will, of corporations who seem to be the only winners when you have wars. So I think too much was imparted to us, and much has been asked from us, and I think that was kind of the deal that was, quote, struck, you know, with those who live in the United States. I want to ask you, how is this going to progress? Is this, you know, not to be ironic about this, but I mean, is your case, are you ever going to see the light of day? Or is this going to be something where they twist you in the wind for as long as they can, or for, I don't know, for eternity? How do you see this all shaking out?
Well, their plan is to put me in jail for the rest of my life. That's their plan. Just like they're trying to do with Irwin Schiff, Lynn Meredith. I mean, you can go on and on. There's a whole list of people that are in prison right now, and they're figuring that they've got a long enough sentence that they're not going to get out. And that's their plan, to quell dissent. And that's what they look at us as. Just like Russia back in the 50s and 60s, they had what they called dissenters. And what would they do with them? They would put them in Siberia, and they would leave them there, hopefully to die. What America's doing today, it's the same thing. You just don't have Siberia.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I wanted to talk to you, especially before the listeners. I've had an individual on that did about maybe 8 hours or maybe 10 hours with me about the Constitution and how it does not apply to you and me. When you spoke about supposedly having habeas corpus and having that not obviously observed, there's thinking that the Bill of Rights are not necessarily for us, that we are extended privileges. And if there's privileges, they can be extended and they can be retracted. I think the first high-profile case of that was in the case of Padilla, who was a U.S. citizen and treated like anything but. And that raised a lot of eyebrows. And now here's a situation where, we're talking to somebody, and that's you, Eddie, that has also felt the brunt of this. What are your feelings on exactly what is out there for us? Because it seems like they just threw everything away, if in fact you had any rights at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, what happened is, during the Civil War, of course, Congress in 1864 created another citizenship. Up until that time, we all had state citizens. You were a citizen of whatever state that you were in, and you were a sovereign citizen. You had all the rights that were listed in the Constitution. But after 1864, there was a new class of citizens that only had privileges and immunities. They were called the 14th Amendment citizens. And so that's where the confusion comes in, because on every document you see, if you go to voter registration, for example, and you sign up to be a voter, what do they ask you? If you're a U.S. citizen. They don't ask you if you're a USA citizen. They just ask if you're a U.S. citizen. And everybody checks yes. So what you're saying is, I am a 14th Amendment citizen. All right? And because of that, I don't have any rights. I have privileges and immunities. As you said, Keith, they can be taken away. Privileges can be taken away at any time. Rights are unalienable. They were given to us by God. They can't be taken away by man.
I don't know if you want to... Well, actually, I didn't let you finish. Well, I guess in a way you have, but what are your hopes that you can have this adjudicated, or somehow, some way come to an understanding where everybody is somewhat copacetic with it?
Well, what I'm doing in this case is I'm challenging the judge to produce his oath of office, because everybody has a right to make sure that the person who's acting for the government is acting within the bounds of his authority. The Supreme Court says so. And so I want it. Give me your loyalty oath. Particularly give me your standard Form 61. That's what everybody should be asking for. Because your standard Form 61 says right on it, it says U.S. Civil Service Commission. All right? You got a commission from the executive branch of government, and they're going to assign you whatever job they want to assign you. In this particular case, he was assigned the position of being a judge over the needful rules and regulations of this Article 4, Section 3 court in Ocala, Florida. And so you just want to prove that. And then you want to say, hey, this is not the court that can adjudicate a crime. Okay? Any act of Congress, you can't adjudicate. So I want to have this transferred to an Article 3 court. But you have to first get the oaths of office so that you can prove what you're saying. And you have to hopefully get the document that identifies the particular area of the Middle District of Florida, in my case, the geographical area. You have a right to that. You need to demand it. You need to stay on it and not get off of it. And I'm not going to.
By the way, if people wish to help in whatever manner that might be, can you tell us at this time how they could do so?
Yeah, if they want to. My wife has not been able to work in almost a year now because I've been in jail for 10 and a half months. And what I've done to try to help her is I'm doing a newsletter now, Keith.
Okay.
It's called the Inside the Beast newsletter. And we put out the first one, and we're just fixing to put out the other one. We're going to try to do them like once a month. And basically it's from me on the inside looking out, giving you what's going on and how, the chinks in the armor that I found, how to attack, particularly if it's tax-related. And we asked for a $50 donation. You don't have to give it. It's a donation, really it is. If somebody says, hey, I don't want to give it, or I don't have the money to give it, but I want to be on the email list because it's an email letter only, we'll put you there, and you'll get it, okay? But if they want to help, $50 is just a donation, and they can contact my wife. I wish I remembered the email address, Keith. It's at freeeddiekane.com, but I don't remember what her, the handle is in front of that. So if you can talk to Cookie, she can give that to you.
Okay, yeah, we'll do that. There's a situation down here in Florida, too. I don't know if you caught wind of this at all. And it's about a dentist in Polk County who had not filed for the last 3 or 5 years. I forget what it was. And now she's gone to court defending herself, and it's not really going well. Are you familiar with this at all?
No, I'm not.
But I think she was trying to get before the court that, I guess, the United States, and one of the definitions, obviously, of the United States is a corporation.
Oh, yes.
Right. And she said, how can I be a citizen of a corporation?
Mm-hmm.
And she might have even, broached the I am a fiction and all this. But the problem seemed to be, and of course, the Lakeland Ledger, as you well know what the press does, whether it's in Panama or whether it's in Polk County, they made her look about as insane as possible. But I had sent this article to the individual whom I spoke about earlier, who had done work with the Constitution, and he said that she might have blown it when they had asked her, well, don't you have a passport? Well, yeah. And you have a driver's license? Well, yeah. Do you have any feelings about that? It's not, like I said, it's not going to go well, but they seem to have trapped her in a sense by saying, well, if you're not a citizen or whatever, why do you have a driver's license? Why do you have a passport? Could you speak to that at all?
Sure. Really what they're trying to get her to admit is that she is a 14th Amendment citizen and not a sovereign citizen of the state. And, when they start saying, hey, this is a privilege, the driver's license is a privilege, and the passport, it's really not a privilege, but they say that it is. Everything that they give you, they say, is a privilege. Well, privileges are given only to 14th Amendment citizens. Rights are given to, or not given to, they are from God, for the sovereign citizens. So, but as far as I'm concerned, from what I see and hear, I don't think she's blown it at all. I think what she does need to do, though, there was a case, a guy named Tom Hewitt, last year, that when he went into court, what he asked for they had him for failure to file. And what he asked for, he says, okay, this is 7203. This says this is the penalty statute. What I need is the offense statute. In other words, what statute did I break in order to have this penalty statute apply to me? And it took a while for the judge to finally catch it. But when he did, then he asked the prosecutor. And the prosecutor says, oh, I don't know, sir. I'm not familiar with that part of the law. Well, the judge says, well, find somebody that is. And the essence of it was they ended up dropping the case. So the case was dismissed without ever going to trial because there is no offense statute that you violated, okay? And Dan Metter, I don't know if you're familiar with him.
No.
He was
You have 1 minute left to talk.
He died a number of years ago, but he wrote outstanding 15-page thing on how the proper legal procedure is for federal cases. And on page 3 and 4, he talks about that specifically, where he says, here's a case, a federal case, in which the judges are saying that 7203 by itself won't stand, that you've got to have the offense statutes with it, and it's just ideal for her. So if you'll contact Cookie, she'll get that for you, and you can send it to that lady, because that's what she needs, in my opinion.
This is our last segment with Eddie Kahn. He is an inmate up in Marion County facility. And what I wanted to mention, if we could, about judges. Something's getting very confusing to me, and we've seen a really grotesque example of it not too long ago down here with the life and death of Terry Schiavo. And we had her lawyers on, her first set of lawyers. And through the process of talking to them before, during, and after the show, I mean, it seemed that one individual, the judge in this case, it's like, why do you even bother having a jury? In fact, there wasn't in a lot of these, proceedings, that the judges just do, they seem to do what they want. In fact, that's what's happening?
Well, in hearings, obviously they have a lot of control. Mm-hmm. The only time that the jury is supposed to have any control is in the trial itself. But I would tell you that based on a lot of the tax cases that I know of, what happens in trial is that the judge simply controls the jury. He determines what evidence they're going to see. In a number of cases I've seen, he won't even let them look at the law. He won't even let them read the law that the person's supposed to have violated. And so when you have somebody that's being so arbitrary like that, literally taking away any opportunity for the jury to make an intelligent, informed decision, that's anarchy, in my opinion.
Well, it seems like that to me, because as you just stated, I mean, in the hearings, I guess when they decide, among other things, what's going to be brought into the trial, what's not going to be brought in the trial, you can get to the case where, I mean, you can get to the point where the judge can actually eviscerate the case. And so who cares?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And, I mean, in one case, one situation with Terry Schiavo, it was a case of, they had video, very recent, of her being anything else but in a vegetative state. And he said, no, that's not going to go. That's not going to float here, this guy, Judge Greer. So, I mean, you look at that and you say to yourself, well, what good is a legal system? It's almost like going in front of a monarch, or like you said, I mean, monarchy can make anarchy too, in a sense of, I do what I want to do, and there's nothing you're going to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
So...
Well, that's exactly right, but you know what? We have to keep on keeping on. That's the way I look at it, and God put us here on this earth to do what we're supposed to do, and this is one of the things that I felt he wants me to do. I don't regret it at all, and my wife has been strong through this. We've been married 29 years now, and so you just have to do what you feel God wants you to do. It's been persecution all through history, right? I mean, in every country, and there's always people that will stand up. There are not many, but there are some. But I would say to people that are in a situation where they have a problem with the IRS right now, the main thing that they want to do, and this is what I would do. Let me put it this way: I'm not giving legal advice here, but I'm just telling you what I would do. I would get the transcript for the Tom Hewitt case, which Cookie has that.
Okay.
And I would get Dan Metter's 15-page thing that he put together on a proper federal legal procedure, and read that case on page 3 and 4, in which the judges themselves say, hey, 7203 by itself won't stand, because that's all they ever use is 7203. They give you the penalty statute. They never give you the offense statute. And it's supposed to be there. It has to be there. And without it, it doesn't fly. So if they get that, then they're going to put the court in a real bind.
You also mentioned something, and I hope you don't mind speaking to this, because I think I picked up that we have two things going on, and we've had shows to this effect before. There is a difference, isn't there, between the United States and the United States of America?
Oh, absolutely. United States, and what's really interesting, Keith, is if you go back and look at the editions of the Black's Law Dictionary, whenever they give a definition of the United States of America, they never put in the same edition the definition of the United States. And then they'll go like edition 3, edition 4, this is the United States of America. I can't remember which is which, but this is the definition of the United States of America, which they say is a confederacy of the states, of the 50 states. But then when they go like to edition 5, and they say this is the definition of the United States, it's totally different, and they will never put them in the same edition together, because they realize that it is definitely different, and they don't want people to understand that it's definitely different. But if you go to the Hovind case, where the Supreme Court said, yeah, there's 3 different definitions of United States, there's only one definition of the United States of America. There is not any others. But there is of the United States. It's and then, of course, they don't even, the Hovind case didn't even talk about the fact that in 18 U.S.C. Section 3002, where the definition of the United States is, there's 3 other definitions there, one of them being a corporation. So in reality, there's 6 definitions of what the United States is.
Have you heard that the United States of America refers to basically those who are in government in the District of Columbia?
I've heard that, and I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. The United States, definitely. I think you have to pin these guys down on, you say, see, they always put in a case, they always say that the USA is the plaintiff, but in the body, they never mention the United States of America again. It's always United States that is the real party in interest here. So you have to pin them down and say, okay, which definition are we using here of United States, so I'll know who is the real party of interest. They don't want to do that, I can tell you, because they really have to tell you that in the States, the only United States that's here is the corporation. And the way you know that, if you go to Corpus Juris Secundum, and it'll tell you that that the United States in a state is like a foreign corporation. That's what it says. It's a foreign corporation with respect to a state. So it's telling you which definition applies in the state itself.
One of the things I've been wondering about, and that is those who got together to make sure that that was birthed a Federal Reserve, and then of course, how do you feed that beast, but with money, or our money, our blood? You have to then have an income tax to send money that way. And knowing that this was not the idea of politicians necessarily, but of, again, those who met in Jekyll Island and such, and yet have obviously government in tow. What I'm wondering about is, why would they create this system and then allow these loopholes in the system that show that, and I mean, I'll agree with you that you and I don't have to pay, that we're not in that category necessarily. How do you make sense of the fact, though, that they would put this thing in and still not turn around and just flat out, take the loopholes away? Because if everybody were to do it, obviously this would not be good for them. So what about that situation? Have you ever thought, like, if they went ahead and went to all these machinations to do this, why would they leave, these gaps, if you will?
Well, I think they have to do it for the protection of the politicians. The politicians always have to be able to come back, just in case somebody says, hey, I figured this out. They can say, well, we've always said it right here in the law, right here, blah, 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 blah. And they have to do that, because if all of a sudden this became really widely known and people rose up in arms, guess who they're going to come after? I'll give you a good example of what I'm talking about. Now, this is going back probably to 1998 or so, somewhere in there. I had a friend of mine who writes an article for a big financial know what? He says, I've known Chris Cox and this other guy, I forget his name, there's two congressmen at the time, since they were, since we were kids, we'd go surfing. In fact, we're going to go surfing today. He said, but he said at lunchtime, he said, I want you to come and have lunch with us because I want you to tell him what you're saying about the IRS is not an agency of the federal government. And so I said, okay. So we went and had lunch. I told them specifically, I said, here's what I'm saying and here's why I'm saying it. Very interesting case. Chris Cox, as you know, is kind of on the inner circle of Washington, D.C. This other guy, he's not on the inner circle. And this guy's mouth was wide open. He just couldn't believe what he was hearing. But Chris was smiling as I was saying all this. Okay? And then when I got through, I handed him 5 documents that I used in my seminar. And I said, here's 5 documents that I used to show that the IRS is not an agency of the federal government. And he just flipped through them right quick, and he says, you're probably right. He says, but we have legislation in place to send them back. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, get those wording. We have legislation in place to send them back. And this was, almost 10 years ago now. So they were ready. They have all these plans and these pre-plans. They're not dumb people that are doing this domination thing that they're doing. They're very, very intelligent, and they're ready for emergencies, contingencies.
When you said send them back, what directly did that refer to?
Well, he's talking about the agency. If you look in, are the agents in the agency, if you look at the definitions of revenue agent and secretary in the Internal Revenue Code, you're only going to see one place. And it's in Title 27, which is alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. It's not even in Title 26. But what it says is that the secretary is the Secretary of the Treasury of Puerto Rico, and that the revenue agent is a revenue agent of Puerto Rico. That's the only definition for revenue agent and secretary in the entire Internal Revenue Code. So where do you think they're going to send them back to?
I did know of that, and I was wondering if you were going to go there, because that's something, again, it's another head scratcher. It's like, what's this all about? It's
Well, it goes back to the prohibition. When they were deciding that prohibition isn't going to work because people are not going for it, we got to repeal it, but we want to tax the alcohol if we're not going to be able to do the prohibition. And when they made that tax, the U.S. government, or not the Supreme Court, ruled it unconstitutional. So what they did was, rather than knocking the agency that they had created out, they just moved it to Puerto Rico. And all this is, it seems like, is a variation of that act and agency being in Puerto Rico, to me.
And they do it, yeah. And they move it to a protectorate. That's not.
Oh, yeah.
And that's
exactly. Well, there's a great case that someone sent me just recently, Keith, on the Internal Revenue Service and on the income tax. And one of the things it says, I think it's BIN versus U.S., BINN versus U.S. Okay. And what it says is that the tax that they're collecting is not a tax under Article 1 of the Constitution. Rather, it's under Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution. That's why they can do it, quote, legally. You look at Article 4, Section 3, that goes right back to the courts that are created by administrative courts, and it's the needful rules and regulations.
You have 1 minute left to talk.
It's the needful rules and regulations of the federal lands and the states. So it's a great case, and like I said, any of this stuff that you want, call Cookie,
okay,
and she'll get it over to you.
Right, and when we post the audio, which will be September 24th, Eddie, we'll have whatever contact information is necessary.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so that'll accompany the audio, and we'll always be there, so people will be able to get in touch with your wife without a doubt. And
okay.
Hopefully we can get back together again also.
Well, yeah, we probably can do that. We'll see how things go this next week or so, and
okay.
I'll have Cookie contact you. How's that?
That'll be fine, Eddie.
You have 15 seconds left to talk.